Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge, a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability and culture of their family's environment. Now, here's your host, Jonathan Guerrero.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you with me. My guest is keynote speaker and founder of Major League Dad. His name is Gary Freeman. Gary, thank you so much for being on the Fatherhood Challenge.
Oh, thank you so much, man. I'm definitely excited to be here, and I appreciate you, man.
Our topic today is on generational abuse in fathers. In some cases, it can mask and hide itself in religious institutions, organizations, and even church leadership. You have your own personal story and experience to share. What happened?
Yeah, I guess you could say that starting with this, I was a PK. I kind of always throw that out there, which stands for pastor's kid. But growing up in a home where it kind of seemed like if you're a pastor's kid, everything is kind of like hunky dory. But to be honest, it was a very tumultuous relationship between my dad and I. It was a lot that kind of went into a lot of wounds that I've really just started now, man, at 38 years of age, starting to really see and be able to take on through really diving into the gospel and being able to take that way, but also with therapy and combining all of that to be able to really dig deep into what I felt. To be honest, it was rough, and it was rough because it was more from a this kind of moral standing that you automatically have to take on, rather, because you're the pastor's son. So, but then going home and having major bouts with my dad in terms of getting cussed out, or if there was like physical trauma or things done to my mother, or like it was very confusing as a child. I tell this story often, especially if I'm speaking or something, where when I was 10 years old, my dad came in my room one night, and he just said, he sat down and sat next to me as I was watching TV, and he said, "Hey, man, you were a mistake, right?" And I just remember just at that age, like coming from a pastor, and at that age, not knowing what that was going to be, doing to me, in terms of mentally or emotionally, and what that meant for me and my confidence as a young man. And I remember that because, when I said I had a chance to speak with my dad 2 years prior to him passing, I was able to ask, like, "Do you even remember that?" Saying that to me. And he didn't. But at the same time, again, when I heard more of his story, I understood. So it wasn't a matter of, getting even an apology for it. It was just a matter of, I get it. But of course, growing up as a child, all of that is making the wound that had to be, at 20 years later, has to now be healed, right? So I would say definitely growing up, it was rough because it was a lot of emotional wounds and a lot of things that were cut open that way, from instances like that regularly in our household. So it was tough, but um, I mean, I'm grateful for that conversation I had with my dad. The last 2 years of his life was the best ever. So I'm grateful for redemption in that way. But, there's still wounds that were caused in growing up in the household.
Why is it so important for dads to know who they are spiritually and generationally, and how can it help them break cycles?
Yeah, I think the confidence of knowing whose you are, um, and knowing that, the God that we serve is the one who gave you every gift, every talent that you have, that he has a purpose for it. So it helps put in perspective, again, understanding whose you are, so that you can understand who you are in this big puzzle of life. The way that it feels, it's like, man, but you have a purpose, you have gifts, you have talents, you have things that are specific that work in the plan of God. So spiritually understanding that, I think, can help set you up generationally, because you're pushing that forward into your children and into your family, and you want that to seep into their lives and for them to understand whose they are so they can understand who they are. And I think that generationally causes the same rift that we kind of see when the opposite happens, right? So if, there's an alcoholic father or an abusive father, those things tend to trickle. Even if we don't want them to, they tend to trickle in different ways in the family throughout generations until there's a stoppage at some point. So I think the spiritual aspect of just knowing God's love for you um, and the way that He went about it and the lengths that He went about loving us, I think helps me and should help us all understand um, His plan for us. And I think any father who understands that as a man, because I really truly believe that the father is just a role of a man. So if a man is able to understand and have confidence in whose he is or who he belongs to understand now what he's supposed to go and do, um, I think that causes a generational rift that we want. And that wave being one that, man, life is still going to happen, but we can cling to who God created us to be and that confidence that we now have. So spirituality is extremely huge, I think, in the role of a father, because that's the foundation of just manhood in itself, but also in how you facilitate going forward and how you um, I want to say preach that to your children, but I don't want to scare guys to say everybody's a preacher, but how we actually put that into our families, put that into our um, wives if married, and really kind of push that forward and start that in our generations to come.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing is there's a big difference between who you are and whose you are. And it it's not interchangeable. There is a sequence, there is an order. You first have to understand whose you are before you will ever be able to understand who you are. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I would say, that's something that I feel like, I don't want to just push that on anybody, but I feel like that truly makes a difference. As much as a tongue twister as it is to say in terms of whose you are versus now who you are, I think that ownership of knowing that somebody loves you so much that he would be willing to put on the cross his own in Jesus and saying, hey, I love you this much. That translates in a way of like, man, I now have that confidence to go and be who God has created me to be with every gift and every talent that He disposed into me in when I was being knitted in my mother's womb. So I really feel like that's an order that if we understand that spiritually, emotionally, physically, that it all belongs to God in the first place, and that's me as well in His large plan of redemption, then man, like nothing can stop us.
I've had Chris Bruno on the program before talking about the train of addiction. It's often a generational train, and it can be anything from alcoholism to physical abuse or even both. When you make that decision to jump off the train doesn't stop moving, and the landing is painful, even traumatic. What happens in those first few moments after you jump is critical to you staying off the train and not running back to the nearest station. Who surrounds you in that moment is essential to your success. What did that look like for you? And what do you recommend for dads who are abusers, both in leadership and those who aren't?
Those first moments, or I kind of consider them like blind steps. So it's almost like something is wrong. Something isn't right. You have all these feelings, and you're trying to run around and fix them yourselves, or yourself, excuse me. But I think for me, it was really the ability to like humble myself to know that, hey, I can't fix this. There's a lot
Mm,
that has happened, and even if it's not my fault, it's kind of manifested its way into how I now operate. So this operating system that I have has to be recalibrated, and I
mhm,
can't do that by myself. So
mm.
Jumping off that train, literally, I kind of envision. I love that metaphor or analogy of jumping off the train because it's so scary. It's moving so fast.
Yep, it
Then
is.
and it's like, man, I'm just jumping off, and I don't know what's going to happen. But I think a key concept for me in that jump is closing my eyes, because if I close my eyes, I get to like stop and just visualize, like, hey, I'm doing this, but I'm going to close my eyes, and then what happens when I open, if I know where to land or if I don't know where to land, I've made the initial step. And
Yes.
as scary as that is, here we go, and getting ready for that ride. And I think that part of it is probably the hardest for anybody. But I think, especially for the abuser or the abused, is just really being able to humble yourself and realize, like, wait a minute, like, what is going on right now? And am I really willing to tackle it, knowing that I need help? I need others to come in and to walk with me and to be in this space of leadership. Um, like I like I said, I grew up, as a pastor's kid, but I saw a pastor operate in a way that I felt like, man, this isn't necessarily godly. So what happens? Like, who's there to like kind of help, or dig in or call out or step in and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's just as important, to have good people, um, praying over you and holding you accountable. And again, that's a big reason for Major League Dad, because I feel like, again, that 30% is assumed to be okay. But a lot of those, they need to jump off a train too. So it's like, how do we, truthfully address it? But I think that unless we actually just take that deep breath and humble ourselves and say, hey, I really want to do this, the right way, it's going to come some lumps, going to come some bruises jumping off of that train. But man, when you heal, there's nothing like, that process of seeing those bumps and lumps go away over time, and being able to trust that you made the right decision in jumping. Um, so yeah, I love that analogy, man. So I think about it all the time now, and I think it fits in so many different scenarios of just life.
And I think you accentuated this other point that I kind of wanted to come circle back and re-clarify. It's
Hmm.
easy to imagine that an abuser would need to jump off the train to
Right.
cease that behavior.
Hmm.
But if you are the victim and
Yeah.
you're going into a new family, you may not have even started abusing your family yet, but you still have this baggage
Yeah.
from this train. You
Yep.
still have to jump too.
Yeah. And that's that I can say is my life. Um, Even with my marriage, and the first 3 to 4 years of our marriage was a combination of seeing these wounds and seeing the baggage get unloaded into my marriage, and being that guy that was like, I'll never be like my dad, and end up being exactly like my dad, just manifested in different ways. So I thank God that I have a wife, who was willing to be like, hey, this doesn't seem right. I love you, but these are the things that are going on. And just seeing, just the different trauma that I was even putting my wife under, and going to therapy and really understanding, like, man, as an abuser, I need to humble myself and jump off this train too, because I haven't dealt with any of really the wounds that I had. I acknowledged them, right? And I knew that these things had happened, but I never dealt with how it was like manifesting or how it was playing itself out even in my own marriage. And when I became a father to our first daughter, and just different traumas that came with even our second child, and the anguish that I was causing towards my wife, like all of that, I know personally as an abuser, a lot of guys just take that as, well, I don't hit my wife, or, I don't do these things. And it's like, man, you just never know what the form of it is until you really sit down and the Lord is showing you, hey, this is harming your family. So this is a way of abuse that still needs to be handled.
That's interesting because your dad might have had a different perspective. So for him, it
Mhm.
might be in his mind. Now, he may not be saying this verbally, and maybe he did, but in his mind, he's thinking, whatever I'm doing to you that you think is that I'm abusing you or mistreating you. Oh, you don't know what you have no
Yeah.
idea.
Oh man, yeah.
Because in
Yeah.
his mind, what he went through is 10 times worse than what you think you're going to. So it gets downplayed, it gets minimized.
Mhm.
Some would call it gaslighting. I mean,
Yeah.
is that a thing?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I think one of my um, I can remember one of my own lines that I would say to my wife if we got in an argument or if something serious was happening that I know was coming from baggage that hadn't been dealt with. Was like, you have no idea what I felt. And I would say, and I noticed more and more how much I was saying that and how it was a deflection. At sometimes it was a deflection from what I needed to actually deal with my wife. And
Mm,
really what it was just a reflection of what I hadn't dealt with between me and my own father.
mhm.
So I think that can be very hard to see or to hear, especially because pain is loud. And it's very loud in our emotions and things of that nature. And sometimes it's just hard to wrap our mind around. Well, it's like, it's not about what necessarily happened to me, it's about what God allowed to happen. And thank God I made it through. But now I'm looking at my own family and I don't want to put them through anything I went through. But at the same time, what am I doing that's affecting my family? And I think learning from the pain can help quiet it some to be able to see where it is that I need to actually grow and how I need to speak to my wife and how I need to speak to my children and how I need to think through fathering and all of those things. But it couldn't happen until I actually came to grips with, like, man, yes, this pain happened, but the purpose of that pain was not to just illuminate it so that nothing can be right between me and my wife and she could never understand the horror that I went through. She wasn't there. So I do have two children and a beautiful wife that I want to treat well, but I need to make sure that I'm as whole as possible so that I'm not inflicting anything inadvertently or purposefully on them for my own baggage.
First Timothy 3 2 through 5 seems pretty serious. I just recently stumbled across this and I was amazed at how blunt it is. It says, so a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self control, live wisely, and have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home and he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. For if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? The scripture's really blunt, but how does abuse hide itself so well inside religion?
What I grew up seeing was the act of religion being something that um, it was so you could formulate it however you needed it to be able to perform to just get what you need. So the act of religion was really taken way out of context in terms of now it's just something that I just do because it at least makes me look good or it keeps my standard high in the eyes of others, but it doesn't ever really call me to any kind of self accountability
Hmm.
because I'm not holding what I actually do to those in my own home. I'm not holding it up to the same light of how I just look in front of church members or congregations. And I think that starts elevating itself above what does my wife think of me when I'm up there? Am I actually trying to live out, and I'm speaking specifically like from this pastor standpoint of,
Hmm.
the scriptures that were just read, but it's like, I saw that. It was like, man, my dad could expound on the word greatly and go, preach people hair on fire and then come home and cuss me and my mom out, and I couldn't understand it. And I really thought about this standpoint of what gets elevated, what becomes almost like an idol in your life that is now bigger than the accountability that you should hold to God and your family. So the idol of him looking good for the members became bigger than him loving and living out the word in front of his wife and children. And I think in a lot of different areas, even when you look through all the things that are in these verses in Timothy, it's like, these are the things that you're called to. And I feel like the perfect person to be able to say, is this man actually following these things? Is a man's wife, if he's married, um, and his children, like those people that are close to you, your family.
Mm,
Can these things actually be said of me without me saying a word from behind the pulpit? Um,
wow.
and I really think if that's something that we focus in on as pastors and leaders, then I think now you start seeing that becoming the norm within the lives of churches and in the life of the pulpit now, because none of it is about us anyway. It's about preaching, the gospel of Jesus Christ and being able to understand his love for us. But that means we have to die to so many things daily. And I think that if
Hmm.
that means we have to look in our own families first. So I want my wife and kids to be like, yes, those things he tries his best to be each and every day in our home. So that way, whatever is coming out from behind the pulpit is landing with eternal purpose versus just a performance.
Major League Dad has been mentioned a few times in this episode, and we really haven't gone there. So, in the last little bit here before we close, I want to just give you a moment to talk about Major League Dad. What is it?
Yeah, I guess it's just Emmy. So it kind of came up. But Major League Dad is a nonprofit that I started back in, technically back in 2020, which was a crazy, obviously, time to start something, but it was something that was just on my heart in terms of what I keep calling that 30%, and being able to speak with or speak into fathers or have that accountability that's there. So doing different um, curriculums and different things that we offer to be able to walk with fathers to really, I call it sneaky discipleship. So really to be able to walk with guys in a way that supports them in a holistic manner. So Major League Dad is a nonprofit that we get to go and do that and speak in different areas, whether it's college or whether it's church men's ministries or organizations just in the community that we get to actually serve within the community. So we strategically go into different neighborhoods and help that way with just different um, bill assistance or rent assistance and things that, especially for a single father, that maybe in different counties or cities is not so easy to come up with, but just to offer that confidence to help them along the way, but to be able to build them. I like the saying where it's like, you give a man a fish, he eats today, but you teach him how to fish, and he eats for a lifetime. And I
Hmm.
like to even add one more adage to that is we want to teach him to fish as we give him a fish and we get to eat together. So it's kind of like,
I love
you
that.
know, so like taking all of that and combining it into life talk, life lessons, owning your story, all that kind of stuff is something that we talk through and we kind of offer in the community through Major League Dad. So that's the effort. That's the reason it's a nonprofit that we try to get that out and spread resources and help in that regard. So yeah.
Absolutely love that. How can dads in the audience find out more about Major League Dad? And also, can they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So you can just go, the easiest way would be to go to our website. It's majorleaguedad.org. And then there's a contact button there. And once you hit that contact button, you can just shoot me an email and it comes straight to me. So I can literally I respond, all day, sometimes just from my phone, being able to respond to just different things. If you know of different fathers that maybe need assistance or things of that nature, we're located in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, But because of previous jobs that I did in like national spans, man, I just try to help wherever I can or try to link to areas that I know throughout the country as well. So, or different organizations. So, yeah, so just majorleaguedad.org, or you can shoot me an email to gfreeman at majorleaguedad.org. So, but the easiest way would just be through the website and just drop me a message there.
Okay, perfect. And just to make things easier, if you go to thefatherhoodchallenge.com, that's thefatherhoodchallenge.com, and you go to this episode description, right below the episode description, I'm also going to post the links there. So it'll be easy to find. You just click on it. It will take you right to Major League Dad. So Gary, as we close, what is your challenge to that leader who is caught up in abuse and or addiction and is scared to make a move towards change? What is your final challenge to them?
The final challenge would be to really start what I call a mirror ministry. And coming out of James. So that mirror ministry is to literally every day look at your life and really figure out, like, am I honoring the Lord in what I'm doing today? And allowing the Holy Spirit to convict. And in that conviction, man, know that in that conviction that's actually where healing starts. So it could be, being caught up in something and getting caught, or being in something that you know what, man, you finally realize this is not good. This isn't how I should talk to people or talk to my spouse or my children or anything. But that first thought is to really humble yourself and look at yourself and be like, man, you know what? There's somebody who loves me enough to check me. And I have to be able and be willing to submit to that, because the one thing that he wants is a wholeness to come out of, being checked. So really being honest about that, not making excuses for it, but really just buckling down and being the best that you can be, because it is generational. And we want to be able to pass on that accountability and pass on the character and integrity of Christ. And that starts with being willing to be checked, especially as a leader, and knowing what that means moving forward and the wholeness that God wants for all of us. So really digging deep into that mirror ministry and being able to really hold on to what God has for us to do.
That's some great wisdom, Gary. Thank you so much for being on the Fatherhood Challenge. It's been an honor having you here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, man. I'm grateful for the Fatherhood Challenge and even what God is doing through the Fatherhood Challenge. So thank you again for having me, man.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatherhood Challenge. If you would like to contact us, listen to other episodes, find any resource mentioned in this program, or find out more information about the Fatherhood Challenge, please visit thefatherhoodchallenge.com. That's thefatherhoodchallenge.com.